What's up, everybody? It's Alex from Heavy New York, and on the phone we got Paolo from Trivium. Thank you so much for your time, man. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Yep. It's so awesome to have you here. Your newest album is What the Dead Men Say. You have these two singles out, one of them being the title track and Catastrophist being the other one. Could this almost serve as like a clear representation of the direction of this album, or is this just kind of like the tip of the iceberg for the new record?
A little bit of both. I mean, I think when we're picking singles, we want to try to represent the album as best as possible. Of course, it's always tricky when you got like 10 songs that are in their own right, kind of different in different ways. And when we wrote the record, we're always trying to make sure every song is like its own thing. So, I think if you're into like those two songs, you're gonna really love what's coming on the rest of the record, because I think we really put a lot of time and detail into each song.
Definitely. It sounds like that for these two singles. Do you consider this just like picking up where you left off after The Sin and the Sentence, or do you think that the making of this record was its own sort of like experience in a way?
I mean, I definitely think it was picking up where we left off, because we essentially, I'd say we wrote the record in a similar way. We worked with Josh Wilber once again for producing and mixing. The biggest difference was that we just recorded everything flipped around. So, once we came out of our own pre-production and writing, we went into the studio and we recorded everything from like guitars, vocals, bass, and all that stuff first, and then the real drums last. So we pretty much just had Alex play an electric kit in the beginning to give us like a template, and then we worked backwards. That was the biggest difference, I would say.
Mm-hmm. Well, one thing I've noticed about Trivium, and this could just me being, like sort of, being a fan of the band, but like if you were to play me like a small portion of the song, I could tell that that's off of Ascendancy, that's off of The Crusade, that's off Silence of the Snow, etc. So it's fair to say you guys have always sort of like taken a new approach to everything you've done, right?
Yeah. So, and I think like it's just like, when we were younger, I think it was more of like, taking like a left turn for the next record was kind of like the big ideas we would have. And I feel like now we've kind of just settled into like, we kind of know what we do best, and we know how to write well together. So it's like, we don't take like unnecessary like left turns, like, we're just gonna like kind of just, up and change the sound drastically this one. It's more of like, how can we make these songs better? How do we write something new without like going so far out there that people are like, whoa, is this even Trivium anymore? So that's kind of where I think where we're at, and I think we've just kind of settled into the sound that is what our band is.
Yeah, well, I feel like Trivium has like a lot of many different sounds anyway. So like like it almost seems like you have a way of keeping it interesting without like abandoning what you've always done, right?
Yeah, I think that's kind of just been the big thing. When we're writing, we'll get in there and we'll try out all types of ideas and stuff. And I think there's just like a sense of like when we're getting a little too far off course, or if it doesn't feel right. And that comes in a lot of different ways. Like if something just feels like it's almost too extreme, and that's kind of a weird thing to say, but like I feel like there's like this sort of line where you're like, we're a mix of like a lot of different genres of metal and music, and if we kind of go too far out one way or the other, it starts to not feel like what we do. And even with like our new songs, like there's those like elements and flashes of like kind of death metal, kind of black metal elements, but like we're not really that type of genre either. So like it kind of is just like maybe our spin on something like that, and that's kind of how we keep it within our sound, I would say.
Yeah, it's funny. Like I had a joke about this where like maybe to like the more extreme crowd, you guys are like Cher, and to like the more radio friendly crowd, you guys are like Emperor or something like that.
Yeah,
you can't win.
Yeah, like and that's always that's like one of the things too of like when we're picking a single, and I think our barometer for what's heavy is a lot different than like even a lot of our fan bases. If that makes sense, because we have a pretty broad fan base. It's not just like extreme metalheads that like know the history of metal, and like if I start listing off bands, like there might be a lot of stuff that a lot of people that listen to us don't know, but it's in our sound. So it's it's always like, you know, we're not going to come out with like maybe the heaviest song right away. Like maybe there's a better song to represent the record to all of our fans. So that's always like something we think about, and I just always try to keep in mind that, like, you know, what we consider like a more melodic song might be a very heavy song for like someone that doesn't know too much about like all of like what's come before us and what has inspired us, you know?
Yeah. This might be kind of a somewhat of a silly question, but like when you take like a very melodic song in like the Trivium catalog, such as like This World Can't Tear Us Apart, versus like a very aggressive song like such as like Light to the Flies, is it almost kind of like a different energy in executing that song, or maybe a different side of you, Matt and Corey, and everything like that?
Yeah. I mean, I guess with that song, like, my feelings with like the Crusade record was like, it was like a very ambitious idea that like we just didn't put enough time into, because like we pretty much came off Ascendancy, which is like, you know, the band, I joined the band in like August 2004, and a lot of the songs were being, you know, we would play some of those songs on the tour I did, but like pretty much like the band had years to like write those songs, and then like going into the Crusade was this like sort of I would say a more of a rush job just to get back out on tour. And you know, I think it's like a world apart, like those two songs, and just the energy. And you know, I think Flies, of course, is a song we play to this day, and the other one's one we've never played, and you know, there's reasons for that. And I think you know, with the new stuff, it's like we kind of like, we've gone the opposite route. You know, we spend so much time now with writing and thinking about like writing that like it's just like a totally different thing.
Yeah. Well, I've always said that This World Can't Tear Us Apart, that is like your We Are the Champions for Trivium. Like that. I thought that was an amazing song. But like,
thank you.
Yeah. One thing though I was really curious about is, you know, being so experimental with your sound, and you kind of just answered that, because like, you know, I've seen you guys play live now 3 times. The first time was on tour with Seven Dust, then it was on tour with Sabaton, and then it was on tour with Arch Enemy. You had to have noticed like many different audiences in different crowds, right?
Oh yeah. I mean, we've definitely, I feel like we're definitely I would say that if you were to like add up all the different bands we've toured with, we have to be one of the most diverse touring bands there is. Like, we've really, you know, we've gone out there with just about everyone in the metal and rock scene that we could, you know. And I mean, we've been out with Dream Theater, gone out with Asking Alexandria, we've gone out with Slayer, Iron Maiden. Like, it's just like pretty much you put a bunch of names up on a board and you start throwing a dart. That's how we've kind of toured over the last like 15 years. And I think, you know, we've really picked up so many different fans from that, and that the touring has just been the bedrock for like what we've built and how we've been able to kind of sustain ourselves and last this long. And you know, it's definitely been cool, because it's like you got to go out and you don't like have a surefire captive audience when you get out there. When you're touring with so many different types of bands, you got to really work for it, and you know, earn those new fans. Definitely,
and I think that's what also keeps it interesting as well. Do you sometimes like adjust your set list though, depending on like the type of tour that you're on?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think like maybe more so in the past. I think now we got to realize like, you know, the best thing is to really kind of go out and just put your best stuff forward, or what you think is best, and you know, don't try to like be the other band you're out with necessarily, you know. But if we're going out with like other bands, like, you know, obviously like the Lamb of God Megadeth tour, like, you know, I think we're gonna like go out there and try to like make our set, you know, appeal to the broad mainstream metal crowd that's gonna be there. And you know, I don't think we have to go like super deep cut, super, you know, crazy heavy stuff. Because like at the end of the day, it's like a lot of the people know the big songs the most, and so we have to kind of keep a balance of like both of those things when we pick a set.
Yeah. You know, one thing I was always curious about, I love asking bands this, because when you look at the entirety of your catalog from, you know, from when you came into the band, from Ascendancy to What the Dead Men Say, can these almost serve as like, in a way, like self-portraits of who you, Matt, and Corey, and, you know, everybody in the band was at that particular time?
Yeah, I mean, I think kind of like a snapshot where you're at with your music and your writing, and you know, it's always cool, like, to go back and listen and kind of, like, get in the headspace of where you were. You know, I think that's, like, one thing that I always try to tell fans, you know, like, you can't really replicate a record. You know, we could go and make, like, you know, we could try to, like, take an album like Shogun and, like, try to rip it apart and try to, like, recreate something exactly like that. And, you know, I think we'd make something cool, but it would never be the same thing, because so much of, like, what into that record was just what we were experiencing at the time, and just what we had to go through to make the record, you know, even before we got into the studio. And that really has a lot to do with how records come out.
Mm-hmm, definitely. I was curious about your approach to bass playing, because I love talking to bass players, because I feel like playing bass has both a great emphasis on rhythm and melody. So for you, when you are like focusing on, like, you know, when you have to lay down the bass parts, are you focusing more on like the drum patterns that are laid down, or do you have to, like, do you need like riffs from Corey or Matt in order to know like what chord progression to play on the bass?
Yeah, I mean, it kind of different every time, because, like, if it's a song I brought in, you know, I obviously know all the parts, you know, riff-wise and stuff, because I wrote them. But, like, when we're in the studio or when we're in the rehearsal room, it's kind of a mix. You're kind of just, you're playing off everyone else. And I like to learn all the riffs, you know, like, pretty much 99% of the time, just to know them. And then I might start to, like, as we keep jamming it, I might change my part up, or I might feel it needs something a little different under it. And, you know, I think it's like there's a time when everyone locks up and plays the riff, and then there's a time when, you know, the bass does its own thing, you know, with the drums, or just something outside of that. And I feel like when people listen to the record, you know, they're going to hear a little bit of both. And I think there's, like, a real great effect to that when, like, everyone's kind of doing their own thing, and then it comes together, and it just, like, feels so much heavier. You know, when it all finally comes together, it's like the payoff, and, you know, you've been waiting for it. Everyone's, like, kind of doing their own thing, and then it just hits.
Yeah, definitely. And, you know, watching you play, I'll never forget this. This is not a quote from me, but, like, you know, people love to make the bass player jokes, but when I met a fan at your show at the Seven Dust tour that you did back in 2016, like, somebody was like, Paolo destroys all those bass player jokes that people make. So,
well, I'm happy to do that.
yeah, you're there with Peter Steele and Lemmy.
Well, thank you.
I have a couple more questions for you, if we're doing okay on time.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, but, like, you know, you kind of led me into the next question, because when I've seen you live, it's a completely different experience than simply listening to the album. You guys, you know, execute the material very well, but, you know, with the crowd interaction and everything like that. For you, though, is there maybe a similar energy that you put into your live presence as you do when you're songwriting, or is it a completely separate art altogether?
I think it's kind of about anticipating how a song will play live. I think we're better at that too. Just from playing live so many years, you really get a sense of, like, what crowds really love about the music we play. And, you know, once you kind of, like, keep that with you going into the writing, which I think one thing we do now that I think we're going to kind of continue to do from now on, is that we really have split our writing up over time, where there's not, like, a set period we write. We'll do, like, 3 songs in between a tour, and then we'll do another 3 songs. And so there's, like, you're coming off of playing, like, 30, 40 shows, and so you haven't lost that sort of, like, touch of, like, the live experience. Like, you still kind of remember the vibes, and I don't know, like, maybe just for us, that just, like, really helps us, because I feel like the energy of the crowd, just, like, and the excitement of playing the shows, is something that's hard to replicate in the studio, because obviously you're by yourself and you're just, like, going through takes and stuff like that. But, like, when you've come from that and it hasn't been too long, and you bring that into your writing, it really does color it a lot more. It makes it interesting. And I think you can imagine, like, oh, I could see the crowd really loving this part of the song, and building it around that.
Yeah. Definitely. And like it's funny that like you kind of mentioned that because like also I feel like crowd interaction is also something that you have to like practice. It almost seems like it's almost like I imagine being in a band is almost kind of like rehearsing in a play. There's almost some like choreography that you have to practice, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think when we're in the rehearsal room, like we don't like, I would say we don't like practice like every single aspect of a live show. Matt will, after we kind of get the songs down after a few days when we're sounding tight, like Matt will kind of run through it with like, he'll talk before a song that he's going to talk before when we get out on tour. But a lot of it's kind of, you just start to build it on tour. I think you get into this repetition and you start to like do things, and whatever works you kind of keep with you from show to show. And then by a couple days into it, you've really kind of established like your sort of like your thing for the tour, like how you operate and stuff. And I feel like we even get into the same like patterns of like when you move during a song, like when you're going to the other side of the stage and stuff like that. It's like a subconscious thing, it's really wild how you don't even have to plan that stuff out and it just starts to kind of come together.
Yeah, and you mentioned you're writing in between tours, which I think is a cool idea. But like, are you sometimes worried that could affect maybe like the consistency of the record? Like, let's say you wrote 3 songs after that Arch Enemy tour, but then you did like 3 songs after that Avatar tour. Like, if like a listener, would you be able to like listen to it and be like, okay, that's clearly off of that time, that's off of that time, or?
Well, like I feel like we don't separate it so much to where it's like. There's like a year or 2 in between like writing and stuff. It's like, I would say we pretty much are like, okay, our goal is to get back into the studio at this point in the year, and we'll start to be like, okay, well, we're going to like split up the writing during this time and this time between like, say, one tour, so it's like, it hasn't gone so far to where you're like, okay, I'm not feeling this stuff anymore, let's do something else. It's really like, we've written like 2 or 3 songs that we're really stoked on, and we start to think about what we're going to write for the next 2 or 3 songs when we get off this tour. And so it's like, we really don't like spend that much time apart from the writing sessions, but it does give us a little bit of time to kind of like think about where the record's going and, kind of keep a focus on like, what each song needs to be. And that seems to just be really working for us at the moment. So, I mean, it's always possible we'll find another way to kind of approach a record down the line, but it's like this record and the last record just came together so smoothly. It's hard for me to see us changing that.
Mm-hmm, definitely. You ready for the most difficult question of the interview? I stumble every musician with this. How do you know? How do you know when a song is done?
Let's see. I would just be like, when you feel like you're just really changing stuff for the sake of it, and I think this is a big issue for recording now because there's no finite, like, thing that's holding you up from changing something a million times because you're not recording tape. Tape was a finite resource to, like, record with, and it would be great if you kept recording over it, whereas like Pro Tools, it's forever, you can just keep going. I just think everyone's got to like look at each other and be like, that's it, there's got to be that consensus feeling that you've nailed it, and everyone gets that sort of like, I don't know, that excitement, that the hair standing up on your back of your neck, like just kind of like that crazy feeling of like, this is awesome, this is great. And it's hard to kind of put an exact science to it because once you hear it, and I think that's probably the best answer you can give for it.
Yeah, I almost feel like being in a band is kind of like jury duty in a way where like if one person in the jury has a doubt, like you don't move forward. I almost feel like it's like that with a band too. Yeah,
I mean, it's definitely like, I feel like it's kind of like, someone's not feeling something, you kind of want to find out what's not working for them and see if there's a good, like, middle ground for it. And sometimes, like, I think, like, there's something to, like, when everyone else is getting something and you're not right away, maybe just kind of living with it for a bit and, maybe maybe you'll understand it better later. And I've had that happen before where I'm like, oh, I'm not really sure about that, but I live with it for a little bit and then I like it by the end.
Of course. And one other question I wanted to ask you is when it comes to songwriting, do you almost kind of have to like put yourself in a certain environment or in a certain room in order for like ideas to flow through, or do you sometimes just think of an idea out of nowhere sometimes?
I mean, for personal writing, when I'm at home, when I'm like starting a song, I gotta kind of be in the mood to do it, and I also just like I need time in between writing. Like I feel like with like this last record, like it's still coming out. I couldn't even think about like sitting down and like writing maybe a song for the next record yet, because I'm like I'm not sure where I want to go, and that is usually the hardest part of it. Is like where do you start? You know, when you have this blank piece of paper in front of you, that's the hardest part of the entire process. Is like, what is this going to be? What's the first line of this story? And that takes some time for me to kind of think of. But once I get it, then it's like, okay, well, I know where I'm going now, and it's a little less pressure.
So before we go, I want to thank you so much for your time today. Great to be able to talk to you. Right now, the Lamb of God tour with Megadeth, that's still happening? That hasn't gotten canceled yet?
Nothing's been changed yet. It's like everything else, just kind of in a holding pattern as we wait to see how things unfold. You know, it's crazy time, that's for sure. I mean, we're all sort of just like hoping things. You know, it's like you want things to work out so you don't have to change plans, but I mean, reality is going to dictate all of that.
Yep, I think the strength of the metal community is being tested the most at this point, and I know we'll get through it.
Yeah. I mean, we get through it, and it'll be, you know, get back to normal. But until then, it's, you know, you gotta just kind of roll with how things are going.
Yeah. Is there just anything else with Trivium you'd like to promote? The new album comes out April 24th, right?
Yeah. Just, you know, thank you to everyone that's been listening and spreading the word. You know, it's really tough not having touring on the horizon to really get out and promote it. So, you know, the fact that people are doing that for us and helping us so much, like, you know, just thank you. And I'm excited for people to hear some more new music. You know, we might have something else out before the record releases, so keep your ears open for that. And yeah, that's about it.
Yeah, you guys have some very dedicated fans, so I know they'll be with you every step of the way.
Definitely.
Yep.
Definitely agree with that.
Yeah. But Paolo, thank you so much, everybody. Paolo of Trivium, What the Dead Men Say, out April 24th on Roadrunner. Be sure to pick that up. This is Alex from Heavy New York. We'll see you next time.